Good morning and welcome back. We've got several folks here on Zoom, a few people here face to face. Welcome. Hope you're having a great Friday. And I'm excited to take some time today to wrap up this week's discussion about some of the ways that groups meet and work together. So that's kind of on the docket for today. Before we do that, I just want to give a couple of quick updates and notes related to the class. A couple housekeeping notes. First of all, you should all now be able to see the feedback on your reflection. So again, I apologize for some of the Canvas issues with accessing that, but I definitely recommend that you check Canvas. If you haven't done so already, it should show up as a submission comment along with your grade out of 150 points. One thing that I recommend that you do is ahead of turning in your reflection, that you just take a look at that feedback, know what went well, and some of the things that you can continue to work on. Just to add a couple observations about things that I noticed in your reflections, continue to work on. First of all, make sure if you're citing material in the course, for instance, you're talking about group membership and roles, and you're including something like paraphrase or quote, just to include that page number, which is a super easy way of tracking some of that stuff. Keep working, again, on double checking some of the spelling and grammar stuff. So one thing I notice a lot is using commas to separate clauses of sentences. So if you say, for instance, we went to the store, you would use, for instance, comma, we went to the store. So just make sure to use commas to separate those things out. Also make sure when you're referring to things like apps, like Snapchat, or you're referring to things like Zoom, right? Those would be like product or app names. So those would count as proper nouns, right? So you'd want to make sure to capitalize something like Zoom or Snapchat. And then continue to work on breaking up some of those larger paragraphs. Again, there were some paragraphs that would go on for like a page or more. And if it's over half a page, it's a good idea to just break that up into two. And then another thing, just to continue to work on is just with your integration of quotes, right? So one thing that I recommend is that you transition into and out of quotations. Some folks did that really well, but you might say, next up, we'll talk about the issue of the self-perception inventory. The self-perception inventory is, and then you might follow that up with a quote. So if you're just like inserting a quote in the middle of a paragraph and it doesn't make grammatical sense or fit the sentence, that can be a little bit awkward, right? So just continue to work on making sure that the quote matches up with the sentence and makes sense within the paragraph. So just wanted to highlight a couple other things that I noticed in regards to that to help you as you're working on that group assessment. And then I also know that you're probably working on this and some other assignments, and I decided to push the quiz back. So rather than having a quiz for this week's content that's due by this Sunday, what I'll do is have a merged quiz for you next week that includes stuff from this week as well as next week's reading, just to give you more time and to make things a little bit more manageable for you as you're going through everything that you need to do this morning. I also, and again, I'll post this as an announcement on Canvas, I wanted to make a note about a class meeting that we have coming up. So this coming Monday, you're still meeting face-to-face. We have a regular class meeting and all of that. The following Monday, so Monday the 21st, we're not going to meet face-to-face. I am going to be at a conference where I'm just presenting some of my research and work. So what we'll be doing is I'll give you a prompt on Canvas to complete. It's asynchronous. You don't have to show up to Zoom during that time. So I just wanted to let you know that's listed on that schedule and calendar, but just to remind you that that's coming out there, that you should plan on not having to come to class during that class time, but having a prompt to complete that will be around or maybe a little bit shorter than the amount of time that we need. Again, that would be on Monday, February 21st. Not this coming, but the following. So what I'd like you to do is just to take a little bit of time on your own to write and type as the prompt to get us started for today, to share a little bit about your progress on this upcoming small group assessment that's due by Sunday. What's your current progress? What have you completed or worked on so far? What do you still need to do? So I know I've received a couple drafts from people. You're still welcome to send drafts by the end of the day, choose to do so. And then I also want you to see if you have any questions about this assignment that I can address or help you out in class too. Give another minute or two for those of you still working. Go ahead and finish up. Current thought or idea that you're writing. I want to take some time now to see if anybody has any questions about this assignment. Anything that I can answer or take some time to address, knowing that you'll have between now and Sunday, wrap up and submit it. If you haven't turned in your Get Out of Jail Free card, you can do so and choose to do that for this assignment. It wouldn't be due until the following Sunday. I also kind of got a note from a couple people in your feedback that, having feedback lagged due to needing to have, like using the Get Out of Jail Free card, not getting everybody's graded assignments back sooner. Wasn't the greatest. I definitely understand wanting to get back as soon as possible. One adjustment that I'll make then is I will turn specific feedback for you around sooner and just get you the feedback sooner. And then I'll wait to talk about things in class until I get it from everybody. That way you still have time on your own to find out how you did, get the grades that you did. But I can also be fair to people who haven't turned it in yet by waiting to talk about it in class until I get it from everybody. So I thought that was a good point that was raised in feedback and just a thing that I'll change to make things a little bit easier for you. If questions come up related to this assignment later, just let me know. Just as a reminder, again, the rubric and the different parts of the prompt are available on Canvas to help you out sort of as a checklist as you're working through this assignment. So Last class, I asked you to work on some anonymous feedback for me and complete that Google form. Thank you for taking the time to do that. You can still do so if you weren't here on Wednesday or you didn't finish, if you send this by the end of the day today. But I do want to highlight some of the things that I noticed in feedback and some of the adjustments that I wanted to make. So a few things, seems like using some examples and applications, scenarios. It seemed like most people were in the middle spot when it comes to the pace of the course, which is good. One thing that I did notice that some people mentioned is that sometimes like some of the housekeeping or recapping or reiteration of stuff goes on a little long. So I'm going to cut down on the recap of the previous class just a little bit, but I still open things up to questions, and you'll still be able to see the previous slides if that helps you. Just expedite things a little bit. As far as assignments go, I'm happy to, again, post that rubric and guidelines to help. If you're having questions about the assignment guidelines or just are unsure of how assignments are being graded, let me know. Again, I try to be as transparent as possible by using that available rubric, but I will try to make sure that that is laid out as clearly as possible. We'll continue to have some group work opportunities and things outside of a more lecture style to engage with folks. Some people mentioned the makeup assignment, right? So that's typically done, right, if people aren't able to make class. So I still like having that. Again, that's an option to help out people who, for whatever reason, can't come in. And again, that's a fair amount of work to sort of rewatch the slides and complete that. So I wanted to add a little bit more. It is around page or so to do. So it does end up being fairly even with folks who come face to face. A couple people were worried about, makeup assignments, meaning that people don't necessarily put the same amount of work in. But I do want to offer them when people are in quarantine or sick or not able to come in. And then I'm going to play around a little bit with format on the weekly quizzes to give some of the options, like a short answer to questions that some people brought up that be useful, as opposed to getting an answer wrong on a multiple quiz. So I'll offer a little bit more flexibility on format for this next quiz coming in. Again, if you have anything to add or you have specific concerns for me about the course, let me know. I just wanted to let you know that I was going to make a few adjustments based on the feedback you had and continue to do some of the things that have been working so far. So the small group assessment, again, is coming up. Remember, by the end of the day today, if you send me a rough draft or outline, I will be able to return the feedback to you. We talked a little bit last class about meeting facilitation, right? The idea that there are some good and bad ways to host meetings. That some of the good practices of hosting meetings can include being able to have a clear agenda, sending out an agenda in advance, ensuring that people are able to participate respectfully, and the ways that bad meetings tend to get off track, tend to focus on disagreements or emotions that are not necessarily centered in reality, and the ways that we host good meetings by making sure we're prepared early, having the agenda and notes together, and so on. Just as a quick reminder, right? Facilitating a good meeting both involves preparing for a meeting, using things, for instance, like Zoom or Google Links, making sure that those are accessible, and coming in early to prep and get everything you need. Making the meeting go well, right? Running the meeting smoothly by ensuring that people can have their voices heard, that they feel respected and listened to, and then using things such as minutes or follow-up emails to ensure that after the meeting happens, people understand what happened in the meeting and have good clarity on how to move forward. So again, these different parts are good things to know. So for today, we're going to be talking about Robert's Rules of Order, which doesn't sound exciting, but if you ever find yourself in a group meeting or hosting a group meeting, I can guarantee you that you will have a much easier time with hosting and running a meeting by using this system. So if you ever find yourself as a supervisor, a facilitator, a leader of a friend group or something like that, right? There might be some times where this structure could actually be really useful to help you to manage and to deal with group meetings. So we'll talk a little bit about what Robert's Rules is and some of the ways that we can use this effectively in meetings. I'm curious, prior to this class, are there folks that have heard of or familiar with this structure? Yeah, so I was gonna expect to hear that from you, Alana. This is a really kind of useful way of thinking about meeting facilitation. So it's called Robert's Rules of Order because it actually comes from this fellow here, Henry Martin Roberts, who is interesting. He actually he served in the military in the Civil War and actually helped to represent New England, Washington, D.C., the Union in the Civil War, which was kind of an interesting background, and was also an engineer, so had a very kind of eclectic and interesting life. But one thing that actually came up from Henry was that he sort of started to realize that whenever he was in meetings or groups, that oftentimes those meetings were inefficient. And coming from a military background, he really wanted to create a structured and clear way to hold and organize meetings. And wildly, Henry Roberts' Rules of Order, even though they got their start hundreds of years ago, actually are still very, very much used today. In fact, the Robert's Rules of Order, the formal book, continues to get updated editions and continues to be printed and circulated really widely. In fact, 80% of formal organizations in the United States actually use Robert's Rules of Order. So there's a lot, for instance, of nonprofits that use it, large businesses or corporations that use this structure of organization. There's also, even like formal institutions like governments that will use Robert's Rules when debating or discussing legislation. So there is a good chance that in your employment, in your career, or at least in some organizations you've been in as a part of your life, that you will run into Robert's Rules. And oftentimes for an outsider, it can be really confusing. You hear people talk about, is there a second? Or all those in favor, or like that type of terminology and not really understand what's happening. So it can be really good to understand Robert's Rules to gain context as to meetings that you might see yourself.
I've always heard that as parliamentary procedure.
Yes.
Is it the same?
Yes. So Robert's Rules of Order is parliamentary procedure. Yeah. It's a method of doing parliamentary procedure. Okay. So it has persisted for a really long time and continues to be actually used to this day because of a lot of different factors. The biggest one is that it's airtight, that in basically every situation, this kind of rule book explains what you need to do. In fact, there's a famous quote from Henry where he says that basically you will use 80% of the rules, right, or 80% of the book, 20% of the time. That is, the book is long and it covers a lot of material because there's a lot of contingencies or variables or things that could come up. What happens if somebody suddenly gets sick and leaves in the middle of the meeting? What happens if somebody hurls a personal insult or makes fun of somebody during a meeting? There's a lot of prep for these weird contingencies. I'm not going to ask you to read or go through a massive document like this, just to say that if you do decide to read through it or to look into this a little bit more, that it does have a very exhaustive take on this. So I do want to use today's class just as a chance to go over some of the foundational details and things to know. Another really cool thing about Robert's Rules is that it creates an opportunity for people to debate and to discuss an issue, right? It incentivizes and encourages minority opinion on the topic. For every action item or proposal that's brought forward, there's a chance for people to debate and deliberate and discuss the issue, which is a really good way to ensure that even if you find yourself in a situation where a lot of people disagree with you, you're the minority opinion or voice, you can still make that voice heard. People aren't just going to pass legislation or do things without your input. So it is able to encourage a lot of people to participate. We think back to James Madison's Federalist 10, which is sort of a foundational piece in thinking about governmental organization and structure. one of the concerns he brings up is the ability to engage with minority opinion and voices on issues. Not everybody agrees, even if we do a majority vote, right? There still needs to be space for those underrepresented perspectives to be heard. So yes, as Haley brought up, this is parliamentary procedure. It's another way of thinking about or describing it. It is a system of rules, right? It's an agreed-upon framework that members of a group or organization do that is designed to do a few different things. It's consistent, right? The idea here is that by following a rule book or a set of ways of doing meetings, you're able to do it the same way every time. It's fair. It allows things to be voted on and discussed and planned in a way that avoids the risk of bias. That's especially important if you're in a group where you don't want to create this feeling of bias or that voices aren't being brought in. And again, it's efficient, right? It helps group meetings go smoothly and be run effectively. It is able to answer questions and resolve a lot of issues, right? Who gets to speak and for how long? What we do if a discussion goes on and we're getting off track. How to make decisions, right? We've talked in the past couple of weeks about group decision making, about how that can be difficult, right? Getting people to get to a decision on an issue. What we need to do if we can't commit to an issue but need to move on. And also what to do if we change our minds, right? So there's a lot of contingencies that this type of organization is able to accomplish. So I want to go over some of the key concepts here. And I also wanted to share a short video that sort of acts out and shows us how to use this system in practice. So first of all, is an idea of a quorum. So before you can have a meeting, you need to have a necessary number of people in the group who are attending and going to that meeting. If you follow the news anytime in the last several years, you might be familiar of certain states in the US where there's a controversial piece of legislation. So for instance, this happened in the state of Oregon regarding energy policy. It's happened in certain states regarding, such as Wisconsin, regarding collective bargaining and union rights. Sometimes when there is a super controversial piece of legislation and huge political divides, you will literally have members of a state house or senate who will flee. They will physically leave and hide and not go to meetings. They'll like go to random states or go to random locations. The reason they do this, if there's a bill that they don't like, is so that they don't need a quorum. If a certain number of state senators or representatives are not physically present at the meeting, they cannot hold the meeting. And they cannot even pass the legislation that's not wanted or liked, right? That's an example of failing to meet quorum. So when you're hosting a meeting or participating in a group, right, you do need to have enough people present such that things can be passed, things can happen. So reaching a quorum might mean reaching 2/3 of people in attendance. It might be reaching 75% or 3/4 of people in attendance and so on. Think about it this way, right? If you have members of a group that disagree with your decision or don't like something that you're trying to move forward as a group, and suddenly in one of the meetings they're sick and they don't show up, you might think, aha, this is my chance to muscle through and pass what I want to do since they're not there to oppose it, right? Quorum prevents that. It says a certain amount of people have to be there in order to actually have a meeting where things get done. Using Robert's rules, oftentimes meetings are structured in two different parts. So they have different tasks or goals. And when you're thinking about like what you do in a meeting, the first item is typically reading and approving minutes. We've talked about in the class so far about how minutes are detailed, specific things about what happened in the previous meeting. They help us to recap and refresh us about what went on. So you can have people look over and then hold a vote to approve those minutes from the previous meeting. As we mentioned before, doing housekeeping early in a meeting is a really good way to get things organized and to build good momentum for the future. You might also early on do what's called a call to order. where you give people the opportunity, maybe you assign somebody to spend 5 minutes or so to share something that helps us to prepare or think positively going into the meeting. For instance, our College of Arts and Humanities, Social Sciences, held a college meeting a few days ago, and we had a call to order where we had a professor who shared a short story, and that was an interesting, kind of fun way to get us started. Reports. So oftentimes when you're involved in an organization, you might have people that are members of smaller organizations that are relevant or have something to do with the main organization. So for instance, right, if you're a senator or you're occupying a role at ASCOU, right, you might also be involved in some other like student council or government work. And if that's the case, you might report on what's happening over there at that meeting, right? Or if you're involved with a radio production, maybe you get in touch with and report on a conference or event that you attended. So reporting on whatever things happen is a way that you can have group members work together. Unfinished business are the holdovers or the things from a previous meeting that you weren't able to deal with or resolve. Maybe you just couldn't get to it in time. Maybe you needed additional time to work through, but that's unfinished business. And then new business are the new items that you put together an agenda for. A motion is a formal oral proposal. I motion that we approve the minutes. Second would mean that there's somebody who orally gives support for that motion. For a motion to happen under Robert's rules, you can't just say, I want to do this thing. There has to be somebody else who will second or support what you do. I motion that we approve the minutes. Second, that just makes sure that there is some level of support for what you're suggesting that we do. Stating the question would mean that the parliamentarian or leader of the group, right, who's in charge of the rules, opens things up for debate. There is a second, therefore we have the opportunity to debate, bring up concerns and issues. I think the minutes look good, or I was looking through the minutes and I noticed that we did not include this detail, right? That's an opportunity to open up debate. A pending question is the issue or topic that's currently under debate. And then you would typically conclude by holding a vote. So let's vote on approving the minutes. All those in favor, and typically they would give oral support. Aye, or raise their hands. Nay, people who oppose. Abstentions, right? An abstention is if you choose not to vote for whatever reason, as an aye or a nay. And then based on the threshold or amount of support that's needed, a motion would pass or fail. Depending on the organization, right? The amount needed to pass or fail is going to look different. So for an organization like the United Nations and the Security Council, there are current countries that have veto power or the ability to shoot down a proposal just on the basis of their own disagreement. Well, other organizations just require a simple majority. So I wanted to share a short video that I think does a great job of putting Robert's rules into practice. And so it's a good way of thinking about and looking at how Robert's rules can be used given the things that we've talked about so far. A lot of other organizations, ways of having meetings set up are not as effective. Recognize somebody to speak or address an issue. Prevents sort of rocking, just like back and forth that doesn't really engage each other. It's kind of rocking. Motion, there's a second, debate. Move forward from there. Discussion or debate on the issue. Once discussion ends, we'll vote. Ayes. But the next agenda. Also offer an amendment. Point of order concerned about the conduct or rules of the organization. So if you're violating the rules, right, you would raise something like a point of order to highlight that you're not following the guidelines. So if you are not going through the agenda in order, that would be one example of raising that concern. So there's a few other specific things to do, like a point of information is asking something like a clarifying question. So I thought that was kind of a fun way of looking about this method in action. Again, there's a lot of specific details that you can get into and look at a bit more. I'm not going to ask you to know like all of the nitty-gritty about how to do this type of parliamentary procedure, but I do think it's kind of fun to understand it a little bit better and to see how it can be used, especially since you might do for group observation a group that uses this form of organization. And then before we do the scenario for today, I wanted to just make a mention about tracking minutes, right? So there's a lot of different ways you could go along with doing minutes. For instance, you could do things such as location, date, time, people in attendance at the beginning. You could have the listed agenda or action items for the meeting. And then you could talk about the specific debate or discussion that happens related to minutes. That's one way of doing it. You could also do it more informally, where you just have an open discussion related to meetings. Task somebody to take minutes and to do so effectively. If minutes don't go well, you might switch around who does it, or you might have rotating people that handle minutes, right? Make sure to indicate who is speaking on what topic with tracking minutes. That's really important to highlight. So-and-so said this when we had our meeting. Tracking those in attendance is important. Take attendance, try to figure out who is there. That's really important as you think about following along with meetings, especially if you have people that aren't going to meetings, right? You can make sure that that's written. Tracking votes, who votes, what is the support, what is the vote that's held, and does it pass or fail. Save, archive, and date, right? Make sure that your minutes aren't just stored on your laptop, but are in a shared drive or document, or emailed out to make sure that everybody gets access to those. Paper trail, right? When you're part of a group or organization, one of the biggest hangups is situations where things are said or mentioned orally, but they aren't written, right? A paper trail will potentially save your job. It'll save you so much time and effort just to make sure that information or things that come up in your meeting are saved and documented for later. Again, prevents he said, she said situations. Make sure that people know what happened and what's going on. So here's what I want us to do next. Congratulations, you all are members of ASCOU. So I'm going to split you into two groups here face-to-face and one group on Zoom. Your group members, are tasked with passing a motion to give all EOU students free chocolate for Valentine's Day. Hooray! I'm exciting. What I want your group members to do is to just spend a little bit of time to make sure you all can understand the basics of parliamentary procedure and how to participate. And then after that, when you have the time to talk and prepare, I'll ask each group to demonstrate using Robert's rules how they would approve this motion to give all EOU students free chocolate. In other words, take some time to discuss in your group how you would act out preparing and passing this motion. And then I'll ask each group to show us how to do that. So let's go ahead and do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then Zoom folks, I'll have you be a breakout room. Take some time to prepare, and then I'll ask each one to share.
Sure, yeah. So you could see like go down that. Used it quite a bit.
One thing to think about as you're preparing is assigning roles or figuring out who will do what as you're acting this out. So the parliamentarian, who's the person that for the motion. All that stuff.
Thank you.
Free chocolate, surprise. I like that idea a lot.
Okay, I
like Girl Scout cookies.
We did it in high school. We didn't make like $1,000. It's minuscule, but it helps. I just don't know how to explain it at state school. Animal brands. So like the FFA would bring an animal after the parents and your class.
So there's two different types of. There's a traditional one where everyone just to go in a line on the boat. So like there's a list here of options, and then there's a so basically
I think this would be a great opportunity for us to grow as a community and make those who like most love have Valentine's Day. Oh, okay. I agree with that. So, all right, is there any member rights and address the chair? All right, I'm going to want to Madam Chair, all the chair, right? Any opposed? All right, chair recognizes member. Good job, guys.
It sounds like since we're wrapping up, just take a quick moment to finish up. Doesn't need to be perfect, right? We're all kind of learning and figuring this whole thing out.
Okay, so basically somebody stands up, makes a motion. No, somebody stands up and I recognize them. Then they make a motion and somebody seconds it. And then no, I recognize. No, I recognize. I don't know how to do it. He lied.
The chair recognizes the speaker in the black mask. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Or thank you, Chairmaster or whatever.
Chairmaster.
I think it is. I don't know. They call it Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, or whatever. Chair together.
Mr. President.
Seems like we've got some good progress here. So I'd like to. So I'd like to hear from the different groups to kind of share access out. Let's start with the Zoom folks. So I know that you can't do it physically, but maybe verbally. Go ahead and share how you would act out or do this process.
So we discussed someone approaching the chairman. So in the case that it was a girl, a woman, it'd be Madam Chairman. I moved to make a motion to give all EOU students free chocolate for Valentine's Day. Then the chairman would say, is there a second? The motion might or might not be seconded. To pass it, it has to be second. Once it's second, typically there's discussion, but if I'm right, there's a movement that goes straight to voting. I don't know, I'm kind of rough with my Robert's Rules of Order, but and then if it goes straight to voting, if 2/3 majority votes and it passes, the motion is passed.
Okay. Yeah, good work. A couple things to add regarding your question. So if you open things up for discussion or debate, typically you'll say discussion and then maybe wait a period of time. And if there's no response, seeing no discussion, we move to a vote, right? So you'll open it up to discussion, but if it doesn't happen, then you would just go to a vote after that. And then also for terminology, typically a lot of meetings now will say like chair rather than like chairman or chairwoman. They'll just say like Madam Chair, just kind of as a different neutral way to do that. So good work on this one. All right, let's have the group here and act out and show us how they would do it.
All right, let's go ahead and move on to agenda item number 3, updating all EOU students for chocolate for Valentine's Day.
Madam President, I motion to give all EOU students free chocolate on Valentine's Day.
My name is Megan Schwander, and I second the motion.
All right, you're first.
I believe this is a great opportunity to grow as a community and make those who are feeling lonely on Valentine's not as lonely, therefore boosting mental health around campus.
A second.
I agree with previous speakers.
Is there any further discussion? No? All right, let's go ahead and move on to the vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Okay, the ayes have it with the 4-0 vote.
Awesome. Having someone raise you on board and kind of walking through the procedure worked really well. Only thing I would mention is depending on the vote, you might say abstentions if that was a thing being offered, but really good example of going through that whole procedure. And then folks over here. Doesn't need to be perfect, we're all working together.
All right. Motion to move Bill A. Loan to the floor for debate. The bill plan is to give all EOU students free chocolate bars on Valentine's Day. The floor is open for any speaker. Yes. The chair recognizes the man in the mask.
Forward the motion to provide free chocolate to students on Valentine's.
Motion has been forwarded. Does anybody second?
I second.
All right, then it's been moved to debate. The floor is open to debate.
Oh,
The floor is still open.
I
to
changed
debate.
my mind, I don't like it anymore.
The bill does not pass.
Ah.
Sorry.
Oh. Y'all were mentioning that there might be expenses, so it's okay. So sometimes in situations like that, you might say, seeing no debate, no vote. But yeah, that's a good example again of kind of having that on the docket, having people call speak. So thanks for making this fun and interesting. Again, you might not really use this or find this helpful right now. It could be helpful in groups that you're part of in the future, or it could be something you can integrate as a way of engaging with groups. Either way, I think it's important context and information to add to our understanding of small group communication. So to wrap up for today, we talked a little bit about Robert's Rules of Order, how we're able to use it to focus on minutes, action items, and help with the ways that meetings are structured and organized. Next week, again, we are meeting next Monday, but the following Monday, we will be meeting. Next week, we're going to talk about leadership. What does it mean to be a good leader? What we look for in leaders, and how can we use leadership to make our group meetings go effectively? So, Friday, we got like a minute or so early today. Go ahead and pass forward or email me your thoughts for today. Best of luck with wrapping up your small group assessment. If you need help, if you're working through that assignment. Have an awesome weekend, and I'll see you all again next week.